47, Eleanor Whitford said, counting again from the top of the list, and her pencil broke against the page. Mrs. Pine, we are 47, and we have a vestry, a coal hole, and a crypt the rector says smells of his uncle. Where do we put 47? In the crypt, said Mrs. Pine, who was not afraid of any building old enough to be cold. The vestry takes the infants, the coal hole takes the slates. And you, Mrs. Whitford, will be standing at the door at 8:30. Because if you are standing at the door at 8:30, the mothers will bring them. The mothers will bring them whether I'm standing there or not. They will bring them sooner if you are. Eleanor pressed the heel of her hand into her eye. Behind her, through the gap where the school's east wall had been the night before last, she could see straight into what had been her own classroom, the alphabet frieze still tacked above the slate, the Z half torn off, and the rest of it bowed inward, like a sheet hung out in a wind that had never stopped. The roof was on the floor was in the cellar, the piano was on its side in the gas main. Right, she said, Street Andrew's basement. Tell the rector we shall be his guests by Monday. The rector knows already. The rector knows everything before I do. He has been a rector 41 years, Mrs. Whitford. He has a system. It was Friday morning, the 15th of November, 1940, and the school had been hit on Wednesday night between 8:15 and 9:15, while Eleanor was in the Anderson with her 3 children listening to a stick of bombs walk down the railway cutting and stop by the mercy of geometry on her place of work and not her house. The house still stood, so did the rector's, so did the church. More or less the chancel was open to the sky on the south side, but the crypt was sound, and the crypt was where she now meant to take the only primary school left in 3 streets. Behind her in the kitchen, Margaret, 12, was making toast for the smaller ones. Tom was 9 and arguing about his socks. Joan was 6 and very quiet, which in Joan meant she was thinking Eleanor had not heard from George since the 11th of October. He was somewhere in the western approaches on an escort destroyer the censors would not name, and the last letter had said only that the weather was vile and he had bought her something at a shop in Liverpool he would tell her about when he could. Mum, Margaret said from the kitchen doorway. Mum, the postman. There won't be one. He came yesterday. He's at the gate. Eleanor went out. The postman, an elderly man with a son in North Africa, lifted his cap to her and handed her 2 envelopes. One, a brown buff she knew without opening, was from the county education office, and the other, a folded blue naval one, addressed in George's writing, dated the 23rd of October and franked at Greenock 5 days ago. She held them both for a moment in the cold November air. Then she opened the naval one first. He was well. He had not been able to write. He had bought her a brooch in Liverpool, a small enamelled thistle that the woman in the shop swore was Scottish silver and not a button off a forfar jacket, and he was sending it under separate cover, and she should not be cross when it did not arrive for a month. He said the children must be very brave and that he was very proud of her. He did not say where he was. He did not need to. She put the letter inside her cardigan against her ribs and opened the brown buff. The county education office regretted to inform her that, in light of the destruction of St Andrew's Primary School, Lewisham, her position as headmistress was suspended on full pay, pending the completion of a report, and that pupils were to be redistributed to the nearest extant schools as soon as a survey could be conducted. She read it twice. Then she folded it into quarters and put it in the pocket of her apron next to a piece of chalk and a darning needle. Mrs. Pine, she called back into the kitchen, we open on Monday in the crypt. We will not be redistributed. That is not what your letter said, is it? That is what my letter is going to say by Monday afternoon. By 11, they were at the church. The rector was in shirt sleeves in the nave, with a broom in one hand and a list in the other, and he had already moved the choir stalls against the south wall so that the crypt steps were no longer blocked. The crypt was a long stone room under the chancel, 12 feet by 30, with 2 coal stoves at the ends, and an arched ceiling that smelt faintly of damp and tallow and, yes, very faintly of his uncle, who had been a sidesman from 1893 to 1928 and whose memorial tablet was set into the east wall. You have 47, the rector said. I can give you the crypt and the parish room. I cannot give you the vestry. The women's voluntary service have it on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the canteen. They will share it with me on a Monday and a Wednesday and a Friday. They will. I have asked them. You asked them before you asked me. I knew what your answer would be, Mrs. Whitford. She wanted, very briefly, to put her head down on the wooden table the rector used for his rota sheets and weep. Instead, she said, slates. We will need slates. The ones from the school are under a piano in the gas main. The slates are upstairs in the choir loft. The senior boys carried them up last night. The chalk is in the rector's cupboard. The Bibles for the older class are in a tea chest by the font. The infant primers are wet, but Mrs. Pine thinks she can save 30 of them. You have done my work for me. I have done my work, Mrs. Whitford. Yours starts on Monday. She walked the crypt in her coat and counted the floor in paces. 12 by 30 was 40 paces. She could fit 4 ranks of benches with an aisle and still have a corner for the youngest to do their letters on slate boards on the floor. The 2 stoves would be enough if they kept the door shut. The light was poor, 2 narrow grills at street level. She would need lamps. She would need the rector to get her lamps. She would need to find Albert Cox, who repaired bicycles and kept a tin of bicycle lamps under his counter, and ask him what he had. At 3 o'clock, the air raid siren went, the daylight one, and 47 mothers and grandmothers and 1 or 2 older sisters came down the lane between hawthorn hedges already half stripped by November. Eleanor stood at the church porch in her coat with her list, and she said to each of them, looking each one in the face, Monday, 8:30, the crypt. Bring a slate if you have one. Bring a piece of bread for the milk. We are not closing. O.P. Mrs. Harker, whose son was a private with the Royal West Kents in Egypt, said, Are we permitted, Mrs. Whitford? We are permitted by me. The county will follow. Mrs. Stainforth, who had buried her husband at Dunkirk and her elder boy at Mers el Kabir, said, Will it be the same teachers? It will be me, and Miss Aldrich for the infants, and Mrs. Pine for the readers, and Mr. Coleridge 2 mornings for the 11s. Then we will come. It was as simple as that, and it was not simple at all, because the county office did not yet know it had been overruled. The first hour Monday was a hymn in the register, and a long silence, while Eleanor read out the names of the 47, and each child said, Here, Mrs. Whitford, and 1 or 2 said it twice because the crypt swallowed sound and they were not sure they had been heard. Then she set the 11s to long division on slates, the 8s and 9s to a comprehension out of an old reader about a lighthouse keeper, the 7s to a sum sheet she had drawn up on a Sunday before the war and never thrown away, and the youngest she gave over to Miss Aldridge, who took them through the door into the parish room and set them at painting with the powder paints the women's voluntary service had left on the windowsill. At 9:20 the first siren went, and they were not surprised by it, because they had agreed already that on a siren the children would put their slates down on their laps, and Mrs. Pine would close the crypt door against the cold of the nave, and Eleanor would call out the long division questions from memory, slowly, in the dark, until the all clear came. There was no all clear that morning. The siren held for 40 minutes. Eleanor recited the 17 times table backwards, asked the readers what a lighthouse keeper would do in a fog if his lamp went out, told Miss Aldridge to lead a quiet round of Daisies R.R. Silver, because the youngest were going to cry if no one sang, and when at last the all clear came, she said, very steadily, And now we will do our copybooks, because I want to see whether the gentleman who designed the letter G knew what he was doing. Joan, who had been brought to school because Eleanor could not leave her at home, and because Joan had asked, very seriously, the night before whether she might come if she was very quiet, sat on the floor at the back of the parish room and drew an aeroplane on a piece of brown paper. The aeroplane had 3 engines on each wing and 1 on its tail, and the word DAD written carefully across the fuselage. She did not show it to anyone. She put it in the pocket of her pinafore and she went back to her copybook. By Wednesday they had a routine. By Friday they had 31 slates, 53 primers. The rector had walked to the Methodist Hall and asked, a kettle on the smaller of the 2 stoves, and a deal table with a green baize cloth on which Eleanor wrote the day's date in chalk for the children to copy. The county office had not yet replied to the letter she sent on Monday afternoon, in which she had explained in 3 brisk paragraphs that Street Andrews Primary School was operating from the parish basement of Street Andrews Church, that 47 pupils were attending under the same staff as previously, that no parents had requested redistribution, and that she would be obliged if the report could be amended accordingly. On Friday the inspector came. He was a thin man named Mr. Marsden, who had been an inspector since 1924 and had been very kind to her when she had taken over the school in 1937. He stood at the top of the crypt steps in his overcoat and looked down at the 4 ranks of children writing the same sentence. The Kingfisher dived on the same line of their copybooks, and he closed his eyes for a moment as if to listen. How long can you keep this up, Mrs. Whitford? Until the school is rebuilt. They are not rebuilding schools. They will rebuild this one. On what grounds? On the grounds that I am running it. He came down the steps and stood next to her at the back of the room. He watched Joan, who was 6 and ought to have been with the infants but had quietly insisted on staying with her mother and was at present drawing a kingfisher entirely from imagination on the back of her slate. "You have your own children here," he said. "I have a daughter at the grammar, and a son and a daughter here. The son is in the 8s. The daughter is everywhere. Have you heard from your husband?" "Last week, he is well. My nephew was on the Jervis Bay. I'm sorry." "It was very quick," they said. "That is what they always say." He stood with her in silence for a moment. "I will say in my report, Mrs. Whitford, that I found a primary school of 47 pupils being conducted in the parish basement of Street Andrew's Church under proper discipline, with adequate provision for shelter during alerts, and that the headmistress declines redistribution on the grounds that the parents do not wish it. I will say that I observed instruction in arithmetic, copying, reading, and singing, and that the standard appeared to me satisfactory. Thank you, Mr. Marsden. I will also say that in my judgment, the County Education Committee should regard this provision as a temporary continuation of the school rather than a closure, and that the headmistress should be returned to active duty pending the question of the building. I cannot promise they will agree. It will be enough." He turned to go. At the foot of the steps he paused. "Mrs. Whitford, may I ask why?" She thought about it. Outside, somewhere on the Lewisham High Street, a milk float was going by. Inside, the Kingfisher had finished diving, and Mrs. Pine was beginning the 8 times table with the 8s. Joan was looking up at her over the rim of her slate. "Because if I close, Mr. Marsden, 47 children spend the morning in their kitchens listening for the siren, and because their fathers are at sea and their mothers are at work and their brothers are in Egypt, and the one thing I can give them between 8:30 and 3:30 is a chair and a line of copy and a woman at the front of the room who is not afraid. Are you not afraid? I am terrified. Every morning, the boy who delivers the post comes up our lane at 7:15, and every morning when I hear his bicycle, I am terrified, because one of these days the letter he is carrying will not be from my husband, but about him. And I get out of bed, and I dress my children, and I come here, because that is what the work is." "Yes," he said, "that is what the work is." He climbed the steps and put his hand briefly on the crypt door. Then he was gone. In the second week, George's brooch arrived. It was an enamelled thistle the size of a sixpence with a silver pin, and the woman in Liverpool had wrapped it in tissue paper inside a small cardboard box that smelt of someone else's cigarettes. Eleanor pinned it to the lapel of her coat at the door of the crypt on Monday morning, and Mrs. Stainforth, bringing her youngest, noticed it and did not say anything but smiled, and Eleanor knew the smile meant, "He is well then. He sends you a thing because he is well, and he wants you to know it." In the third week, the county office replied. The letter was short. It thanked her for her communication, noted Mr. Marsden's report, and stated that pending the structural survey of the school site, the temporary provision of instruction at St Andrew's Parish Hall was approved, and that Mrs. E. Whitford was returned to active duty as headmistress, with effect from the date of the original interruption. There was a postscript in pen at the bottom, in a hand she did not know, that said, "Mr. Marsden was very particular. Carry on." She read the letter standing at the deal table with the green baize cloth. 47 children, having finished the morning's copy of the sentence, "The Kingfisher dived," and a clean line of the letter G, were waiting for her to tell them whether they were to have arithmetic or geography next, and behind them Joan was holding up her slate on which she had drawn, in a child's careful capitals, the words, "We are here." "Geography," Eleanor said. "Where is the River Mersey?" "The Mersey is between Liverpool and Birkenhead." "Mrs. Whitford," said Tom from the 8s. And there was a small ripple of laughter, because Tom always knew, and was a little proud of it, and Eleanor felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, the muscles of her shoulders loosen. "That is correct, Thomas. And in the Mersey, this very morning, there are ships." "Whose ships, Mrs. Whitford?" "Oars." Outside, the November sun came briefly through the south grille and laid a yellow stripe across the stone floor. A child traced its edge with one finger. The kettle on the smaller stove began to sing. Eleanor folded the letter from the county office in quarters and put it into the pocket of her apron, where it lay against the broken pencil, the piece of chalk, the darning needle, and the 4-week-old letter from a sea she would never have to name. The school was open. The children were here. And somewhere out on the grey water, a man who had bought a brooch in Liverpool was steaming home, by such routes as the Admiralty saw fit, to a wife who had refused to close.